Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Quantum Action. This is one of the mastermind groups that we've got going. And today we're here with three good friends of mine from different locations around the world. And we're going to be discussing Think and Grow Rich, written by Napoleon Hill. We're going to be talking about the book, the principles taught in the book, but above all, what we personally have learned and applied in our own lives. So I'll just introduce everybody here. If you've been watching the podcast, you know who these three other gentlemen are because I've interviewed each one of them just recently. We've got TJ Hoisington over here, who's in Washington, in Seattle. And then we've got down here, we've got Ben Woodward over in Utah, in Lehi in Utah. And then down here, just below me, we've got Chris Harper over in Toronto, Canada. And then myself, I'm near Manchester in the UK. So, guys, let's start off with Think and Grow Rich. And I'll start off by telling everybody how I came across. This is the very first copy of Think and Grow Rich that I bought, and then recently I purchased this version. Now, how I came across this was interesting. I was over in the States doing my flight training, and I came across the work of Tony Robbins. Bought all his tapes, put him in my suitcase when I headed back to Italy, where I was living at the time. And as I was listening to his Power Talk tapes, he had interviewed Napoleon Hill. Well, it wasn't an exact interview because he died before Tony Robbins became Tony Robbins, but it's a tape with him and Napoleon Hill on it. And I'd never heard of Napoleon Hill or the book Think and Grow Rich. So I went out the next day to the only English bookshop in Milan, where I was living at the time. And I walked in, and fortunately, they had one copy of this book. So I bought the book and I started reading it and found it just absolutely fascinating. The most fascinating thing is because it was written back in the 1920s, it was still applicable today. And it was back 30 plus years ago when I first read it, and it's still applicable today. Principle of the book. So that's how I came across Think and Grow Rich. Chris, over to you.
I've heard of the book throughout my life when I started my entrepreneurial journey, but I actually think I came across the book through a documentary at the time I was fascinated by called The Gilded Era. And that was basically the turn of the century with your Rockefellers and everything like that. The book was mentioned then. And I actually never read the book. I went in, did a summary, classic me being me. And then because we're doing this beautiful mastermind, Fabrizio Poli up top got me to actually digest, sit down in my chair and read the book. So this is, I'm actually fresh, just read the book. I think Sunday was when I finished it. So it's all fresh in my mind.
Good. Thanks, Chris. Over to you, Ben.
Yeah, I came across it just as my career was kicking off. I was kind of newly married. I'd started out my career as a graphic designer, and it's obviously pivoted quite significantly since then. But yeah, I was really ambitious, really hungry, and I had a great boss that was one of these guys that was just always willing to take a chance on someone that was young and hungry and willing to really put the effort in. And I think I kind of ticked those boxes there for him. And he kind of had a library of different books, that we sold through our business. And one of them was Think and Grow Rich. And I just kind of went through all the library because it had the Tony Robbins NLP stuff and all sorts of different books from the classics, that kind of classical era of where, personal development was really being manifest, I think, in some of its truest, purest forms, with some of these guys. I just fell in love with it because it came at a time where I was just getting some leverage in my career, and I was reading this stuff and it was giving me a chance to apply it. That was the bit that was really good for me, was the opportunity to actually apply the principles that were being taught and get some benefit from it. And I was like, and it just kind of created a pivotal change for me where it fueled my ambitions, my hunger, and my commitment to run at life just that little bit stronger. So
thank you, Ben. How about you, TJ?
I think I was 23 years old. It was not the first personal development book that I read, but I remember I was working in Washington, D.C. For a senator, and I was struggling with what I wanted, not what I want to do with my life, but what my next strategy was and where I was going to go from there. And I remember getting a copy of the book. I have a newer, the old classic, the same one you do, Fabrizio.
Yeah.
But I couldn't find the original one that I wrote. But let me tell you, those principles in that book, having read hundreds of books around high performance and so forth, they all have the thread that comes through many of the concepts that came out of this book. And I think it's great that you're doing this podcast, but it greatly, and I mean greatly, the concepts and the principles within impacted me from that point on of working in Washington, D.C. on Capitol Hill to the businesses we started later. And life just took off after that. Some ups and downs along the way, but as he says, you just stay focused and you'll eventually get it through persistence. So anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Now let's move on to the next point of discussion is what is the lesson that sort of resonated with you the most? Now, for me, it was the story of three feet from gold. When the guy with the gold mine was digging away and got all this gold, and then suddenly the gold kind of ended. And so he dug away for a little bit more, no gold. Let's just shut the mine down, sell it, walk away. And then the guy that bought the mine from him just went and found a lot more gold than Kit Darby had found. And then Kit Darby went on to learn a lesson from that and went on to build a very successful insurance company. So how many times, and if you see this in the Joseph Campbell's, when he talks about the arcs and like, for example, Star Wars, where you have, the protagonist going through a sort of arc, and then at a certain point looks like they're going to fail, and then boom, they succeed big time. And it almost seems like, anybody that's successful has to go through that moment just before they're successful, where they're about to fail big time. And then they don't. They actually succeed because they persist, as you said, TJ. And so that lesson, 3 feet from gold, I've always said to myself when I'm in a situation, am I 3 feet from gold, or is this something I really need to walk away from? And that is a very difficult decision to make. And even if you do make the decision where you walk away 3 feet from gold, you need to have the ability to sort of not let that bite you and move forward, like the gentleman did in Think and Grow Rich. He went forward and he took that lesson and went on and built a success for himself. And he didn't sit there and think, oh, what disaster, I stopped. Because you could easily have that stop you in your tracks. And how many people have had a situation like that stop them in their tracks? So that's the story that really, really hit me hard the most. And I always remember that story and I always tell that story. I thought that was pretty cool. Chris, over to you.
It's awesome.
Yeah, I think, one of the most powerful things in the book for me is kind of the foundation, I believe, to anyone's success or having a happy life is desire. You have to have the thought of, I want this, I'm going to do this. And then that's kind of the springboard for everything else, right? You can build on top of that. You have to build a skill set. You have to build all these other things that go along with whatever that desire is. But you need that foundation. What is my desire? What is my purpose? What is my goal? What is my target? If you have that, everything becomes, I believe, a lot simpler. So that really resonated with me. I know in my career as an entrepreneur, I'm a huge fan of simple scales, complexity fails. And I think that's born out of kind of that starting point of all achievement is born in desire. I know what I want to do. I know how I don't know how exactly I'll get there actually, but I know that I'm going to get there through Fab, your point in the book too, through constant persistence, through constant belief. And then I'm going to add another one in there because I like this one as well, where thoughts are really important. The thoughts you think about yourself, the thoughts you say, who you are. You're sitting alone in your bed thinking. Don't think negative thoughts. Like when nobody's paying attention, nobody can hear your thoughts. Think positive thoughts. Think belief. I can do this. Manifest it to an extent and then go out and do it. And like I said, that's why I think the most important point for me is the starting point of all achievement is desire. Because you can always go back down to that foundation. If it's getting ugly, if it's getting weird, which it gets ugly. And they talk about this in the book, and I'm sure everyone on this call has been through an ugly moment. It happens, multiple ugly moments, right? But if you can come back down to reality, come back down to, okay, the starting point of all achievement is desire. I am doing this. I should expect it to be hard. I should expect it to be challenging. This is an indicator that, hey, I am on the right path. This is going to be great. I know where I'm going. I expect this. I will get through this. I am better than this. Thoughts become things. So for me, that final point, the most important point to me was the starting point of all achievement is desire.
Thank you, Chris. Over to you, Ben.
Yeah, I'm with Chris. I think it all comes back to that. I think the challenge for a lot of people is understanding the depth of desire required to win. A lot of people go, I want it. I want it, but do you want it enough? You know,
Yeah.
I was at I was speaking with a group of recovering addicts a number of years ago, and it was interesting, a conversation that took place, you know, outside of the meeting, where a couple of them were talking together, and one, to me, in that space there, you've got the rawest, most, you know, it's at its rawest level of personal development. I think when someone is at a place like that where they have lost their sense of control and their ability to govern themselves in a way that is catastrophic for many. But one of them was talking to the other, they were just struggling. I just feel like I'm on a razor's edge every day of my life. It's just terrible, blah, blah, blah. And he's lamenting his situation. And this other lady, who looks like she's been through one too many storms in life, right, says with incredible composure and calmness, and you could see with intense wisdom, she just kind of, she's got her arms folded, she just goes, maybe you just don't want it bad enough yet. and it was just like, boom, you know, and I just think that's interesting, you know, to this point of, you know, walking away when you're just so close. I think what these tough times give all of us is an opportunity to really discover for ourselves, how bad do I want it? Mm-hmm. You know, and it's in those moments where people that walk away, sometimes it's because they don't want it bad enough. You've got to want the consequences of what you want, which means all of the suffering, struggle, and challenge and complexity that goes with success. You've got to want all that stuff too. But the bit that I like, as I kind of read through the book and try to scramble for favorite pieces, which is really hard to do in something like this, because you can find something that's a favorite on most pages, is how intertwined and necessary it is for us to apply all the principles. You can't apply one in isolation and expect for it to work. One of my favorite stories is in that same chapter on desire, where you've got the captain of a military that's invading another country, and they arrive, the soldiers come over on the ships, and famously, and this has happened more than once in history, but yeah, he commands his armies to burn the ships. And he's like, now he puts them on what is known as death ground. It's you succeed or you perish. And with that intensified sense of desire, they go out and they win the war. But if he hadn't schooled them, if they didn't have the other principles, you know, with specialized knowledge, for example, if they didn't have that and he just burned the ships, he's just killed his army, right? So you've got to have the intensity of desire and know how badly you want it. And sometimes those circumstances can facilitate it, but you've got to have the other principles locked in too, in order to really make this work for you. You can't pick out a few nuggets here and go, I'm going to run with this principle. And
much like in sports. I mean, in sports, you can be a really good, you can be really good with your fitness, but then if you can't swing the golf club properly, it's exactly. And vice versa. You know, you could be really good swing, but then if you haven't got stamina after hole number 10, you run out of energy and your score goes out the window.
Yeah, I think people often, in business, look for, this phrase is kind of overused, isn't it? They look for that silver bullet. We're in a crisis, we're in our backswing, what's the silver bullet that will turn things around and help us to kind of change? And what I've learned, and I think what is represented in this book, is there is no silver bullet. I think success in business or in life is like a masterpiece, a painting, and it's a multitude of carefully, properly placed brushstrokes. And each of these principles that we talk about in the book, or that Napoleon Hill talks about, they're masterful brushstrokes that put together create the masterpiece. You can't do it with a single stroke. It's all of these come together to create the artwork, I think.
Yeah. Okay, TJ, over to you. Thanks, man.
Oh yeah, totally. I think for me, it was thought impulses. So to be more specific, it would be auto-suggestion or self-suggestion, along with and combined with the creative subconscious mind, which would connect with this last principle. I'm not trying to spread it out too far, but the sixth sense. And I'll just tell a story to illustrate it. When I was first in the beginning of trying to get my business off the ground, we were living in Provo, Utah. My wife and my 1-year-old son at the time, my first son, Bryce, were in bed, and I was listening to an old tape series of Charlie Tremendous Jones. He was one of those speakers back in the day.
I remember him.
Charlie Tremendous Jones.
Yeah.
And as I was listening to this 4 CD cassette tape, I noticed on the tapes that were on my desk, there was a 1-800 number at the bottom. My desire since I was 15 years old was to be a motivational speaker, one day be an author, be a consultant, and so forth. I just locked onto that vision at an early age. It just kind of just like dews of heaven just fell on me, and I knew that's what I was supposed to do with my life. So I would dwell on the idea over and over and over every day. And that night when I was listening to Charlie Tremendous Jones, listening to a tape, this voice said to me, TJ, you should call the phone number on the tape. I thought to myself, it's 11 o'clock at night. Why would I call the phone number? The thought came back to me again. So finally I picked up the phone. I dialed the phone number. It rang several times. Nobody answered. So as I was getting ready to hang up the telephone, a voice on the other line said, who is this? And I said, well, who's this? And I thought, there was pause for a second. I thought, well, I better tell him who I am because I'm the guy that called. And he said, this. I said, I'm TJ Hoisington. And he said, this is Charlie Tremendous Jones.
Oh,
now,
wow.
why do I tell that? We had a 45-minute conversation. That conversation led that when I wrote If You Think You Can back in 2005, who was one of the first people I called for support was Charlie Tremendous Jones, because we had built a kind of a relationship there. It was through him that he called me one day. First of all, he gave me a great endorsement, but then he called me one day and said, I've got a company called Amway, who said they want 25,000 copies of your book. Can I help broker that deal? I said, I would be humbled if you could do that. So he did that. A few years later, I call his office, as I would do every few months, and say, how are you doing, Charlie? He'd say, how are you doing, TJ? And we would have these nice little chats. And then one day I called and his secretary said, Charlie went to heaven. I said, what do you mean? And then it dawned on me. He passed away. 30 days later, I got in the mail one of his favorite bow ties. Here's my point in telling that story. Thoughts are things. Auto-suggestion is when we play in the creative subconscious mind, when we play an image in our mind, because as you guys have already said, that burning desire, when it is physically in you, that desire, that energy, that excitement to achieve something, all of a sudden ideas and strokes of information and so forth and resources and people will show up into your world that will help you get there quicker. And so what Chris said, Chris said, some people tend to think negative when you're laying in your bed at night. He was saying, don't think negative. And I was thinking to myself, people that have the tendency to succumb to negative thinking are people that don't have goals. They don't have rich desires of things they want to achieve. Rather, they're living in a world of avoidance. And I just believe when you get clear about what you want, and you guys can all testify of this, all of a sudden opportunities will show up that you didn't expect. So that was probably the main thing that I got is auto-suggestion mixed with the creative subconscious mind.
Yeah, to add to that piece, just because I think that's powerful, TJ, would be what you said there. I think is really accurate. It helps grow. So thank you on the point I was making. I think we all have negative thoughts. No one is void of having negative thoughts. It's going to happen. Expect it to happen. But what you said, I think, is really critical. And I think it's easy to take away is sit down and find that desire, find that goal, find that thing that drives you. Because when that negative thought, multiple negative thoughts, plural, arise, you'll be able to find that foundation and keep going and come back to the positive. Get out of that negative mindset as quickly as possible because you have that foundational desire. So TJ, I think that's phenomenal.
Well, let's dive into the 13 principles and let's go through each one. We'll start with desire. And this time we'll start with TJ and we'll work our way the other way around. So if someone hasn't, let's say you're faced with, a child or a friend or someone comes to you and they're struggling, and you clearly see that desire is what's missing. What can you do to help them to have more desire? Or can you not? TJ, over to you.
Well, I don't think it can come from without, but it can be influenced. It's got to come from within.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm a person I'm not the person, right? And I'm trying to inspire them. One thing I tell my audiences all the time is you got to have OCH, obsessive compulsive hunger. And if you don't have hunger, listen, nothing's going to happen for you. You can blame the world or you can go after it. The key, I think, with people that maybe don't have the desires, they really haven't figured out what it is they want, the meaning that they're going to get from it. So really, I find it really helping someone get into their mind, get into their heart, figure out what attracts them in life or business or whatever, and then help coach them into a place where they get more clarity to the point they will make a true decision. And that's the hard part, is making a true decision, because a lot of people sit on the fence.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how many times have you met people that are in their 40s or 50s and even 60s? I know I have many times where they'll come up to me after a speech and they'll say, TJ, I'm still figuring out what I want to do with my life. Mm-hmm. Internally, I'm thinking, what do you mean? And so I get it. Some people, Tony Robbins, when I worked with him, would always say, a man with one watch, or a woman with one watch, always knows what time it is. A man with two is never quite sure. So at some point, and I found this with my own kids, right? I have two grown kids, is you're just going to have to make a decision, find the meaning, get excited about it. What angle of that thing you're going to move toward, what angle of it is going to excite you the most, and then double down on it and start moving, and then doors will start to open.
Yeah. Okay. Ben, how about you? What would you do with somebody that's faced with low desire?
This is a good one, I think. It's a huge question. I was confronted with this. I was doing a workshop with entrepreneurs, a group of kind of small business owners, I guess, a number of years back in Birmingham, England. And we were talking about, one of the starting points being desire, right? And I was like, so what is your kind of burning why, that drives you to action? And some of them were giving feedback. And this one lady at the front of the room, eyes sparkling and glowing with enthusiasm, right? She's confidently kind of sharing her reasons. She's like, her space was in health and well-being. And she said, I've just overcome a terminal illness, right? And she said, and because of that experience, I've got this overwhelming desire to help everyone else appreciate the value of their health, right? And she was talking with such passion and fire. It was exciting. It was fantastic. It was great to hear. But there was a lady sat behind her that kind of folded her arms, right, and had a bit of a scowl on her face as this lady was sharing her story. And I kind of picked up on that. I thought, what's going on in her mind? And as the lady finished sharing, this person behind her kind of thrust her arm up, like you can see she's got a complaint, right? She thrust her arm up, and I said, what are you thinking? And she said, I've got a concern with that story. She said, we always hear about how you need to have this overwhelming desire to succeed, and you've got to have this compelling why. And she says, and I've never had a terminal illness. She said, I'm not saying I want one, right? I'm not saying I want one, but I haven't had one of those experiences that has created for me this overwhelming desire to be able to move forward and achieve what I want. I know what I want, but I feel, and she goes, I feel like a big tree, but with little roots. Like I know what I want, but my desire is just kind of fledgling. It's small, and I know that it's inadequate. So what do I do about that? And I looked around the room and I said, how many of you relate to this lady here that you know you should have a strong desire, but it's inadequate, it's lacking? Over half the room put their hand up and said, yeah, we all are lacking it. We want it, that's why we're here, but it's not strong enough. And I said, well, the answer is really in the metaphor that was just used. You need to grow your root system, right? And develop that desire. And some of us are fortunate enough to be born with, a real strong passion and zest for life and we'll run at things. It's in there, it's in our DNA, and that's awesome. Other people have that inflicted upon them through experience and through adversity, and they go, I've got to get out of this because life has burned my ships, right? And it's thrown me on death ground, and I need to fight my way through or I perish. And then they get it that way. And for the vast majority, they have neither of those. And they go through life wanting more, but not wanting it enough, not having the strong challenge that's really going to force them off the line of mediocrity. And how do you do it? I think it's the law of the harvest, where you've got to plant those, to TJ's comments before, build on that auto suggestion, work on it over time, but recognize that it's a process. It's not an event. You can have a big event happen to you that can change you quickly. Yeah. But in reality, for most people, it's work that takes time to develop. And it's just, you got to feed it. That's why these books are so important. That's why I think this conversation is so critical for so many, because you read, you nurture, you digest, you practice. And as we were saying, before we hit the record button, you fail, and you keep going until you succeed. But it's,
yes, Brian Tracy put it once. He said, mistakes are the signposts on the road to success.
Yeah. So I think you just got to be willing to just keep at it, but you got to feed it. And that would be my answer. How do you help someone that doesn't have the desire? Just encourage them to every day take small steps in the right direction until they get there, and don't quit.
Yeah, I had an experience with this a few years ago. My wife and I were up in Sweden teaching a group of about 250 teenagers about success and setting goals and things like that. And one of the things I was having everybody do was break through a piece of wood with their arm. And everybody managed to break through except for this one girl. And so I'm there and I'm trying to help her, and I'm struggling to help her. And then it dawned on me, because the way we would do this is you would write your goals. You'd have a goal, but you'd write your fears on the board. And the fears is what's stopping you from making the breakthrough, from physically breaking through. And if the person, what happened with this young lady is that the goal she'd set, well, first of all, she hadn't set herself a goal. I said, well, first we need to find a goal. And then we need to find a goal that you're motivated enough. And so let's try it. So I was asking a number of questions until we suddenly hit on the thing that really fired her up. And I said, well, how are you going to feel when you achieve that goal? And now I want you to focus on those feelings. And as soon as she focused on those, and she made that emotional connection, boom, she went straight through. So that was a great lesson for me, because at the end of the day, I mean, I found, for example, there's been times in my life when I've set goals and I haven't achieved them. And when I look back and I say, well, I achieved those 3 goals, but I didn't achieve those other 2. What was a determining factor between success over here and failure over here? And you know something? It's always down to desire. And sometimes you set a goal and you start down the road, and halfway down the road, you realize, you know what? I don't really want this. Now I know more about it. Now I'm sort of halfway down the road. It's not what I really want. I don't want this anymore. And it's okay.
Before Chris goes, I was just going to say, in Think and Grow Rich, right? He said he defines riches as it's not just about money either. So let's just make that clear.
Yeah, very important.
Maybe some people are focused on, well, I have to make money in order to feel successful, and that is not the ultimate message of this book. It's about finding meaning in life and achieving those things that are important to you. So anyway, that's
No, that's really, really important, because some people, they see the title of this book and they think it's about money. It's not about money. It's about finding your purpose and, living that purpose.
Yeah.
That's what it's about. Chris, how about yourself with desire? I think you did touch on it before.
Yeah, just to grow on the point you guys just said, I always say to people, you got to get your mind right, you got to get your body right, and then you can get your money right. I'm a firm believer, get your shit in order, get your head right, get your physical fitness to a place where it needs to be, and then you can focus on the third most important thing, which is financial situation. I believe the mind, the health of your own body is most critical. And that's another foundation I believe in with desire. And then you just operate more efficiently. You're more happy with who you are as a human being. And then that'll help you make better decisions as you start to navigate the rest of your life. But the question was, let me reiterate just so I make sure I'm answering it correctly. Somebody comes to you and they're asking for advice. Is that the question?
No, someone's struggling and desire is the key. That their desire is not strong enough. Maybe they're not doing something that, I mean, like sometimes people are in a job and they're not performing as well as they should do. But maybe that's not what they really want to do. And so maybe they should change and find something that really does fire them up. Like this young lady couldn't break through the piece of wood because she hadn't found something that really fired her up. And that's why it's important. And this is what Napoleon Hill says when he interviewed all these 500 people for the book. And he was looking for those common denominators. He saw that each one of them was doing something that fired them up. There was desire there. But if you're going to do something that you don't really like, it's going to be difficult to succeed compared to if you're doing something that you really like.
Correct. Okay.
That's kind of the thing there on the desire. But let's move on to because I'm just in the interest of time. Let's move on the concept number 2, principle number 2, which is faith. So Chris, I'll let you start with this one. How important is faith? Believing that, what you set yourself is going to happen.
Do you want me to answer that last question? I didn't answer the last question. I can answer the last question quickly. Go. The previous one.
Yeah, go.
If somebody's struggling with desire, I think it's pretty simple. If they've already come to you, I think that means they're searching. I'm definitely a firm believer in not giving unsolicited advice. I was in that space before, and it's not a good space to be in. So if they've come to you, great, they're seeking it. If they're seeking it, I think the answer is actually pretty simple a lot of the time. I think it's one people just don't do. I always tell people block off 30 minutes of every day for the next week. 30 minutes. You can find 30 minutes. I don't care who you are. Sit there and think about, what do you really want? What is that foundational desire? That simple question. And then also to add to that, think as if though money was no object and skill was no object. So what is your deepest desire? What do you really want to achieve? Eliminate the money it would cost to do it, eliminate the skills required to do it, and write them all down. I don't care if there's 500, 10,000, 20, 8, 3, write those down, and then let's revisit them in a month, in 2 weeks, whatever. And then let's start chopping some off the list. And then when you get down to a list of 2, 5, 10, 20, whatever, just go ahead and try the one that's most appealing to you. And see how far you can take that, see how much you want to do that. And it just kind of gives you that direction and that foundation. But I find really a lot of people don't spend the time to actually sit down with themselves and think, what do I really want? And I think this is a really important point for the new generation. I hire a couple Gen Z engineers, 19-year-old, 24. Their generation is so attacked by so many different distractions on a daily basis, from the cell phone to all the apps on the cell phone. So I find a lot of people can now cruise through a huge portion of their life without ever thinking about what they want to do. It's just noise. So I think now more than ever, it is so critical to give yourself 30 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever it is, something approachable and easy, not a huge block of time, and really think about what I want to do. And like I said, once again, money's no object, skills are no object. You can acquire those along the way. Just give yourself that time, give yourself that permission to say, hey, I'm going to actually give this time to myself and think about myself and all of my desires and what is that foundational desire. And then I can move forward. And I think most people that lack desire don't do that simple exercise. They don't think about it enough. They don't give themselves permission to think about it. And they don't give themselves permission to go after it because they've never even thought about it.
Yeah. Well, I hope you enjoyed part 1 to the mastermind discussion about the book Think and Grow Rich. I really enjoyed talking to TJ, Ben and Chris about this amazing book and how they discovered the book, how it's influenced their lives and that. And we've got part 2 and part 3 coming up shortly. So subscribe to the Quantum Action Podcast, which is here to take you to infinity and beyond.